In the last section, we set up some relations between our user, our blog post, and our comment. One thing to be really clear about right now is that these associations that we just set up are only reflected in the Node.js side of things. So none of this has been persisted or saved off to our database just yet. To make sure that everything gets saved off, we're going to have to call save on Joe, the blog post, and the comment. So we can do so by saying joe.save, blogpost.save, and comment.save. Just as you might expect, right? Well, here's a little bit of an issue though. Inside our before each, we have our callback done, right? And we have been saying all along, just like almost every spec we work on, that only after all of our database work is complete can we call done to say, okay, Mocha, go ahead, continue on, run some spec. When we call save 3 times in a row like this, the question very quickly becomes, well, all right, 3 save attempts, but which one are we going to chain on a .then and then call done from? Essentially, we could pick any of these 3, right? But we have a 1 in 3 chance of being right. In other words, we have a 1 in 3 chance of guessing that Joe will be actually saved last, because we want to make sure that all 3 are successfully saved before we actually run any other specs. So to solve this issue, we're going to use a little bit of ES6 code. We're going to make use of a native function called promise.all. I'm going to put out a reference to it right now. Promise is provided by the ES6 spec, so it's the local or native implementation of promises. The all property right here is a function that will take an array of promises and combine them all into a single promise. So in other words, long story short, we can combine all 3 of these promises and get a single .then statement when all 3 have been resolved successfully. So I'm going to pass all 3 of these promises that get created by the save into an array that we're going to hand off to the all. So inside of here, we'll say joe.save, blogpost.save, and comment.save. Now we don't need the saves up here anymore. So I'll clean those up. And now on the promise.all, I can chain on a .then, add on a fat arrow function. And this function right here will be only called once all 3 of these save attempts have successfully been completed. Once they're all completed, we can call done and we're off to the races. The thing to keep in mind here is that all 3 of these save requests are going to occur in parallel. So it will be on average just as long as the longest single save request between all 3, which should be pretty darn quick. This promise.all that we're looking at right here is definitely very frequently used whenever we are setting up associations like this, because we'll want to create some number of records, set up the association, and then save all of them. And only after all these records have been saved, we want to actually take some action. All right, so with this amount of code that we have right here, we should be in a spot where we can start writing tests and just kind of see what happens. We'll see, I don't know, whatever happens. Let's get started. We're going to start off writing a test, and I think maybe we'll just assert that if we fetch Joe out of our database, we should be able to somehow get access to the blog post that is associated with him. So maybe we'll add in a description for this test of it saves a relation between a user and a blog post. I think that's probably reasonable. We'll add on our done and our function. So now inside of here, we'll say user.find1. Keep in mind that our user Joe should already be saved, so we should be able to just dive right in and attempt to find our user. So say name of Joe. And now since we kind of have no idea what to expect with Joe, I think maybe a good first step is going to be to just console log out the user that gets returned, and we'll see where to go from here. So I'm just going to console log our entire user, and we'll figure out what we're going to do with them. Don't forget to call done on here, even though we don't have any tests. If we don't call done at some point, Mocha will think that something bad happened, and it'll throw a big error. Now the last thing that I want to do, right now, we have about 19 or 20 specs inside of our project or so, but right now we really only care about running this single spec right here, this single it statement. So I don't really, just for purposes of development, I don't really want to run any of the other tests that I have in my test suite. If I want to just run a single test by itself, I can say it.only. And when I do so, Mocha will run only this test right here. And so no other test that I have will be saved at all. We're just going to run this one in isolation, and that'll make sure that we just get the quickest debugging experience possible. This is especially useful when you start working with like large quantities of tests, like I'm talking about hundreds at a time, where the entire test suite might take up to a minute or even much, much longer than that to run. Be a good use case for using the it.only. Okay, so let's save this. We'll flip over to the terminal and see how we are doing. So over here, all right, well, looks like everything is good for right now. So we're definitely getting a console log out. Our console log has an ID, a name of Joe, a blog post property, which is empty. Well, excuse me, not empty. It has an ID, but it does not appear to have an actual blog post object inside of here. And then it also has our old or kind of legacy post property. Remember, we were using this for working around with subdocuments. So it appears that we are correctly fetching Joe out of our database, but certainly we are not actually getting our blog post reflected inside this array. What I really want to have happen here is I want to see my blog post object sitting inside of here. Like I want to see that thing. So clearly not quite working as we expect. Let's take a quick break and then come back and figure out exactly what's going on here and how we can get access to our actual blog post object.